Good evening. One of the things I love about visiting indigenous cultures is it lets me step back in time and see how we all lived centuries ago. And in doing that, I've noticed so many things that we've gained and things that we've lost. And one of the things I've really noticed is the fact that our relationships are much different. And first of all, our relationship to the land. In indigenous cultures, there's no grocery store. In tribal cultures especially, no utility districts, no water districts, no fast food restaurants. Nothing stands between them and their survival other than their own ingenuity and their own knowledge of the earth. And they have a very intimate knowledge of the earth. And it's always astonished me. This one Hawaiian woman was at the beach, and I met her, and she saw this crab flipping out sand out of the hole, and she said, the sand's going to the north. There'll be a Kona storm tomorrow. And sure enough, a Kona storm shows up tomorrow. So their knowledge, they're more or less the PhDs of their place on the planet. The other relationship that I've noticed is so tight is their relationship to each other. Again, they don't have the institutions. They don't have Social Security. They don't have an IRA or 401k plan. They don't have elder care facilities. They completely depend on each other for their survival again. And that produces a real tightness. I've noticed women at a well in Africa, for instance, and they're all sitting around joking and talking. They're nursing their babies, and the woman that needs to go to get the water will take her baby and pass it to another woman. She'll start nursing it. That woman will see her goat run off, and she'll pass the baby to a third woman, and she'll start nursing it. So these kids are kind of even raised communally. They live in extended families, and that brings a real tightness. The other relationship that I want to talk about tonight is the relationship to spirit. And it's a very strong one. So this is Malik and her great-granddaughter, Yasmina. And they spend all their time together, 14 hours a day working in the garden. And I've seen this in Africa, Asia, South America, and I ask, why are these two people that are so different together all the time, and this big age difference? And they said, no, you don't understand. Yasmina is just about coming out of the spirit world, and Malik is just about to go back into the spirit world. So they really do have the most in common. And they literally pray to the spirits of the forests, the mountains, the rivers. They put spirits in everything. Their ancestor spirits are so important to them. So in the beginning, I sort of looked at this as superstition, uneducated, naive thinking. And over the last 30 years, I've slowly changed. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how that change came about. So about 25 years ago, I was doing a project in Tibet on the human rights issue there. And I had the opportunity to go and meet the medium that channels the oracle of Tibet, the Dalai Lama's oracle. And it took place in this little monastery. And there were about 60 monks in there. They led the medium in, sat him down, put this big hat on his head, and a very heavy hat. His face turned kind of red. The monks started chanting and beating their drums. And he kind of went into this trance. And he started talking in a real high-pitched voice. And the monks started writing down everything he was saying. And then, after about 5 minutes of that, he fainted, and they literally had to carry him out of the room. And I just watched this, and I was wondering, is this a performance? Did he have a heart attack? But 2 days later, I was able to interview the medium. His name is Tuptim. He was 30 years old at the time. He's 50 now. And he said that he didn't remember a thing that he said when he was in this trance. And he felt very weak right afterwards, for a day afterwards. And so I said, well, how did you become the medium? And how did you get this job? And he said, you know, when I was younger, I had started hearing these voices. And I started feeling very ill. And I was very confused. In fact, I thought I was dying at one point. And an older monk came to me and said, hey, you've got a gift. And he taught me how to go in and out of trance. He nurtured me. He stayed with me for the whole year. And now he is the Dalai Lama's oracle, the oracle of Tibet. So 2 years later, I was doing a project for Amnesty International up in the northern part of Kenya in the Samburu area. And I was taking pictures of these people, and my guide turned to me and said, you know, their predictor has told them that you were coming to take pictures of them. And I didn't think too much about that because there I was taking pictures of them. But he went on to say, he said, they also said that she said that you would hide from them when you took their picture. And I said, no, I don't hide. I'm right in front. I use very short lenses. I'm usually right in front of the person when I take their portrait. And that night I was home cleaning my lenses, packing my bags, and I realized, yeah, I had brought my new camera that I'd never used before. It's this panoramic camera. And this is the way I've got to focus that in total darkness. So all of a sudden I thought, well, that's a coincidence. My assistant said, that's amazing. So it was just something we kind of filed away. But I, at that point, decided what I wanted to do is start actually seeking out these people that go into altered states of consciousness in order to heal or predict for their tribes. And that's what I started doing. And so, by the way, here is the woman that was the predictor. And I did take her picture with the panoramic camera. Her name is Sakulin. She's 37 years old, or was at the time, 5 kids. And she had the very same story as the medium of the Dalai Lama. When she was 12 years old, she started having visual hallucinations. She started feeling sick and dizzy. And her grandmother came and said, you know, you've got a talent. And she nurtured her through it. So I literally went around the world and doing my human rights work and started finding these shaman. And the way I would find them, they never introduced themselves as shaman. You would never know who they were unless you asked the community members, who's the healer here, who goes into trance, and they would tell me and lead me to the person. So this is Namid. She's a Mongolian shaman. I'll just show you some of the 40 I interviewed. This is Morgan Yazi. He's a Navajo medicine man. This is Linza. She's a shaman in Siberia, eastern Siberia. Mingatui, a shaman in the Rawani tribe in Ecuador, in the Amazon in Ecuador. And one of the last shaman I interviewed was right on the Pakistan-Afghan border. There's a group of animists there called the Kalash. And there's only 3,000 of them left. And they're surrounded by Islam. And they hold on to their animistic beliefs. And they're very interesting looking. They're blonde-haired, blue-eyed. They say they're the remnants of Alexander the Great's army. And they're very fun-loving. They make their own wine. But I went there because I was told that there was a 6-year-old boy that was being initiated to be a shaman, and I wanted to see him. So, because everybody I had interviewed up to that point had been a shaman for years, so I wanted to find somebody in that process of initiation. So when I got there, I found, no, he wasn't 6 years old. He was a 60-year-old goat herder up in the mountains. So that's the shaman rumor mill. But anyway, I had taken my 16-year-old son with me as an assistant, and we had to hike for about a day and a half to get up to the top of the mountain where John Dooley Khan here was herding his goats. And he was the shaman for the Kalash people. And again, I asked the same questions. How did you get into this? What do you do for your tribe? He had the same story of hallucinations, being mentored by an older shaman. And the shaman, in different cultures, induce their trance in different ways. By the way, shamanism is a universal practice. It's the world's oldest spiritual practice. And there's a lot of common denominators. But the way they go into trance can differ. In Mongolia, they beat a drum next to their ear. In South America, they take psychoactive plants like ayahuasca. In Pakistan, they did something that was quite unique. They burn juniper branches, they slaughter an animal, pour the blood over the burning branches, and then the shaman inhales the smoke to go into trance. And so here I'm trying to talk him out of doing a ceremony for me because I don't want him to kill one of his animals. And he said, no, I have to do it. My spirits are telling me I have to do it. You've come so far. So the next morning, his son started the fire, started burning the juniper branches, and he started praying to the mountain spirits, the spirits of the forests. And they slaughtered the animal, and he started inhaling the smoke, and then he went into trance. And he stayed into trance for about 5 or 10 minutes. And when he came out, he was very silent. He hardly said anything. And he was very talkative before he went into trance, and I thought, well, this is kind of strange. And I asked one of his sons, through my interpreter, what happened to him? What did he say? Did he see anything? And the son just said, the only thing he said is, your journey is going to be extremely difficult, but you're going to be safe. And that's all he said. So the next day, my son and I took off. We left his encampment and walked down the mountain and headed up further into the Hindu Kush mountains. And we were out in the middle of nowhere. We had a Jeep, and my son started getting sick. And he evidently picked up a bug in the water around John Douligan's camp. And first day went by, couldn't keep anything down. Second day, third day, fourth day, couldn't keep anything down for 4 days. And he was getting so weak he could hardly walk. And I was totally freaked out. We pulled into this little village, and we happened to run into a doctor from Islamabad who was visiting his mother, and he happened to have a bag of glucose and saline and an IV drip and some oral hydration salts, and we brought Dax around. And it was to me, it was like a miracle that whole thing happened. But, so I'll tell you a little bit about the shaman. First of all, this is the common things with shamanism. It's not always true, but in general. They typically are identified with what they call the call. And the call, in the ones I interviewed, almost all of them, it was a psychological crisis. Secondly, they almost always have a mentor, somebody that's been through it and come out the other end of this psychological crisis and can show them the ropes and show them and tell them and comfort them along the way. And then they have to face what they call the initiation, and it's almost always this death, a death of their old self and a rebirth of a new self. And this rebirth, I don't know how to explain it. It's like they take on much more of an elevated consciousness. They expand their consciousness. Their awareness of who they are expands. They expand their circle of compassion. I guess that'd be the quickest way to say it. And as such, they learn to go into the spirit world where they believe the spirit world informs our world of reality here. So that's where things really happen. So they go there, get the information, come back to help people. And then after they've learned their trade, they begin their life of service, either a healer, a seer, a priest. And they typically do this for no money. I mean, this is something they just do. It's just something added to what they do. And in the beginning, many of them resist it because like John Dulikon, he's still a goat herder. He still has to do that. But on top of that, he's the healer for the community. Sekulin has 5 kids that she has to take care of. On top of that, she's the healer of her community. So it is a lot of extra work. So it happened, I put that whole project aside because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to say about it. I felt I was getting in over my head into this world of consciousness and spirits and all this. But a year and a half ago, I met a young kid who had one of these psychological breaks. I just want to introduce you to him just a moment here.
It was just this total shattering, and my mind just opened, and I started thinking of all these different things. And in that sense, it was beautiful. I found it was how I found the first time I had ever experienced a real connection to the universe, where I really felt like a part of this, that I was this was me. It was just like incredible. And so just absolutely amazing. And then I kept going, and then I went way too far, and then it got scary. It was just kind of like a panic, I don't know, put some medication in this kid and just hope for the best. But I don't know if it hurt or helped. It was at the point where I was being diagnosed, I think, for side effects of medications. Like, there was a point where I was taking 15 pills in a day. And just, like, I felt like a lab rat. And the side effects were just awful, absolutely awful. Yeah. Vomiting all day. I couldn't leave my house for so long from just like these awful anxiety attacks, and like the thought of interacting with people would make me sick to my stomach. It was just so much, and I still don't know. I don't know what was a side effect and what was my mind.
So Adam was on drugs, on pharmaceuticals for about 4 years. And he was having such a hard time that he decided to go cold turkey, cut him off, and did a Vipassana meditation retreat. And for those of you who don't know what that is, they come in various forms, but this one was 10 days, silent meditation, 10 hours a day. It's very rigorous. I did one just to see what it was about, and it was one of the harder things I did. And that he was able to stabilize himself. And he got a job at Whole Foods Market, which he hadn't been able to do before. And he started having what he called synchronicities, where he'd have a thought and the thing would happen. And by the way, he's very psychic. He has very strong healing potentials. But he has no confidence in what's happening to him. There's no one that's been able to conceptualize it for him. Anyway, he had these, and he decided he needed to go back and do another Vipassana. Well, they learned that he had this history of mental illness, and they sent him home. So the one avenue that he could have gotten relief from cut him off because of the stigma of his mental illness. So Adam isn't alone in this, by the way. Here's in having bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, any of these heavy psychological episodes. Here's some statistics from the National Institute of Mental Health. 1 in 5 of us will suffer a psychological crisis in our lifetime. And by the way, that's a rising figure right now. The other thing is 1 in 20 will become disabled because of it. And another interesting fact about this phenomena is 50% happens before the age of 14. By the way, most of the shaman, it happened either in their adolescence or in their teenage years. 75% before the age of 24. So it's more or less a phenomena of young people. So here's the difference in cultures that I notice. The shaman's advantage. 1, they have a cultural context. The physiological crisis, although it's difficult, it's believed to be, they put it in a positive light. It's something the person's going to come out of and be stronger in the end and have more abilities in the end. The other thing that's a big advantage is it's not stigmatized. I mean, if you have the stamp of mental illness on your forehead or on your dossier or whatever, you're not going to get a job. It's not like having diabetes or even cancer. It's one of the most stigmatized things that can happen to the person in our culture. And especially if some kid is having these visions and he's not knowing what's happening to him, and the doctor comes and says, "You're broken and you are this," you can imagine how that adds to the problem. So the other thing they have an advantage of, they have a mentor. They have somebody that's been through this process that can take and hold their hand and say, "Listen, I know what this is all about, and this is how you manage it." And the third thing that's a huge advantage is they have a community that buys into what they've gone through. And not only that, they have an outlet for their talents. And many of these people have specific talents that the normal person doesn't have. So that's what is an advantage if you're in one of these indigenous communities. I don't know if you heard the recent TED Talk by a woman by the name of Elinor Longdon. Has anybody heard that one? It went viral. She did it a couple of months ago. This is a young woman. When she went to college, she started hearing voices. And she said, "My nightmare began when I told my roommate I was hearing voices. The roommate said, 'You better see a doctor.' So she went and saw the doctor. The doctor said, 'You better see a psychiatrist.' She went to see the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist gave her the label, schizophrenia, put her on medications. By the way, these medications suppress the symptoms. They don't get at the root problem. And she said, from that point on, she just spiraled down. You ought to listen to her video on how she brought herself out of that. And she eventually got to the point where she said, I realized that those voices were helping me resolve this old childhood trauma of sexual molestation. But it took her and a couple of friends that believed in her to get her out of that hole that she had gone down in because of that stigma. So if you do have one of these issues, if one of us does have one of these issues, we go to somebody. The common method of treatment is to suppress the symptoms with pharmaceuticals. So with Adam, we've been following him on, and so I've been posting this on our blog over the last year and a half, how he's doing and what's going on. By the way, he's homeless now, like so many end up. And we've started interviewing professionals that take a whole different approach to this problem. And in fact, some of the psychiatrists, psychologists we've interviewed, and we're posting them as well, like to label many of these instances, not all of them, but many of them, as spiritual emergencies. And they believe, just like I do now, if you hold these people, if you don't stigmatize them, if you don't scare them with a label and tell them they're broken, and if you give them a place of support, that the psyche itself is self-healing, it will take them and it will eventually work out whatever is going on with them, and they'll typically come out at a higher level of awareness and consciousness that they went into the problem in the first place. There are many people that believe, that we've interviewed, cultural historians, cultural anthropologists, that believe that our species right now is in crisis. You look at the environment, you look at the economic system, you look at what's happening with our continual wars, and we're being asked to raise our consciousness to a whole different level. And so I just want to end with this statement from one of our most famous scientists, and I love this statement. He says, or this quote, "We human beings tend to experience ourselves as something separate from the whole we call the universe." This is actually an optical delusion of our consciousness. It's like a prison for us. Our task is to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This striving for such an achievement is a path to our liberation and the only true foundation of our inner peace and security. That was Albert Einstein. So thank you very much.